My family and I had a caravan in a holiday park in NSW. We would go there every school holidays, and there were many kids that I used to run around and play with. I have fond memories of this place, where I learned to ride a bike and had my first kiss. But other memories are not so good and now leave me with that egg flip feeling in my stomach. The people who owned the caravan park had a son. He was roughly 25 years old, and I would have been around 5 or 6. He would drive around the park and collect everyone's rubbish on a tractor and do other odd jobs like this to help out his parents. Every once in a while, he'd pull up when I was playing out front and ask if I wanted to ride on the tractor. I, being young and naive, of course, accepted it and jumped on, because what child doesn't want to ride on a tractor? This is back in the days where parents would let their children play in the streets without much supervision, and you'd just come back home when the streetlights came on. One day when he dropped me back off at our van, my dad came storming out, grabbed me by my arm and yanked me off the tractor. Without saying a word to the man, he took me inside and told me, "I don't want you hanging around that man again," he said, without saying why. "But he's nice. He gives me lollies," I said. "Just don't. I'm telling you. Don't talk to him." I couldn't understand why my dad didn't want me talking to a nice man who only gave me tractor rides, gave me lollies and hugs, and sometimes the occasional sandwich. I remember telling the man one day, "My dad said I'm not allowed to talk to you anymore," to which he smirked and replied, "Oh yeah? Why is that?" Fast forward nearly 14 years later. My family and I are watching the news when the man's face flashes across the screen, attached to a story where he killed 2 people and is now serving time in prison. My dad said, look at this. I knew he was bad news. There was always just something about him. Do you remember when he used to take you around on the tractor?" My blood ran cold and my stomach dropped. The most disturbing part, he killed people with pills he would call his lollies. Please always listen to your parents. I would be dead by now if it wasn't for them. Hi there. I'm a longtime listener, reader, and finally wanted to share my story. I hope it's allowed on the subreddit, as it's something that has truly stuck with me for over 10 years now. My family and I are from Australia, and back in 2007, we decided to take a month-long holiday to America. We traveled from LA up the west coast, and then went back down through Nevada. We did this by renting a car and doing the whole vacation road trip style. One night we were traveling through Lompoc and stopped in Santa Barbara for the night to sleep. We drove around a while looking for a decently priced motel that wasn't too bring your own UV light, if you know what I mean. My mom and dad found a place that looked okay and went inside to inquire about the price of a room for the night, while my sister and I stayed in the car to listen to music on our iPods. We were bopping around to the Frey album I bought that day when my sister removed her headphones and said, "Look at Mom, what is she doing?" I look out the window and can see into the reception of the motel. I see my dad talking to the manager and my mom displaying very cold and odd body language. She's usually very friendly with the staff wherever we go, so this was odd for her. "What's wrong with her?" I told my sister as we kept a close eye on them. My mom was standing behind my dad with her arms crossed and looking around the place as if she was on guard or something, as if her hypervigilant senses had kicked in. After some time, my mom and dad got back into the car and discussed what to do about staying the night. My dad stated that we wouldn't find anywhere cheaper for the night, and he was hungry and ready for dinner, so we'd better just stay here. Plus, it was the last room available, so we would have to make a quick decision. To his dismay, my mom disagreed. "I don't like this place. I have a bad feeling," she said. My dad argued on, getting more and more irritated that my mom couldn't explain what she didn't like about the place, until my mom finally snaps and yells over my dad saying, "We are not staying here." "Fucking hell, fine," my dad says as he starts the car and backs out of the motel driveway. At this point, my sister and I are looking at each other like, what the fuck just happened? But we stayed quiet as my mom seemed on edge. Anyway, we ended up finding a place to stay that my mom approved of and bunkered down for the night. In the morning, we were all bustling around the motel room, getting ready for the day, when my dad turns up the TV to hear a story on the news about a shooting at the motel that my mom didn't want to stay at. Turns out, about 15 minutes after we left, a couple walked in and booked the last room, and the man that was behind them shot them because they took the last room. We all turned and looked at my mom, who was standing there wide-eyed, watching in horror. "I told you I had a bad feeling about that place," she said to my dad, who was pretending not to listen. Moral of the story is, always trust your gut, or better, your mother's gut. This is a story as told by my dad. My dad was a younger teenager at the time and was riding on the bus in Chicago. A man got on and sat in the seat across the aisle from him. He turned to him and started to strike up a conversation. My dad says that the hairs on the back of his neck raised and he seriously got a creepy vibe from him. The man was all smiles and charm and was asking my dad more increasingly personal questions. Luckily, before things got too personal or creepy, my dad's stop came and he enthusiastically noped off the bus and forgot about this. It wasn't until years later, 1978, the year I was born, that he saw on the news that the same creepy guy, affectionately known by children as Pongo the Clown and Patches the Clown, had a thing for teenage boys. His name was John Wayne Gacy. Here's another creepy detail. My dad is best friends with a guy who happened to live across the street from Gacy as a child and teenager. He confirms that Gacy was a creepy dude. He also confirmed that his parents observed the police and forensics going to work on Gacy's basement and painstakingly removing 26 teenage boys from the crawl space. Sweet home, Chicago. Stay safe and listen to your inner voice. When I was 18, I worked at my college's residential building at the front desk, and I think I almost got assaulted or murdered. You be the judge. During the summer, the building operated as a hotel, so 2.5 floors were hotel rooms, and half of the third floor were for student rooms. The whole building operated with a hotel swipe key system that was pretty outdated. All the doors were powered with 4 AA batteries. If the batteries died, there was a decently lengthy process to replace them and reprogram the door. A dark-haired guy came to the front desk from inside the building while I was working the overnight shift. At around 1 or 2 a.m., he said he left his key card in his room. I made him a new one and made my first error of the night. Hotel guests could have as many room keys remade as they wanted. Students, however, were supposed to be given a temporary key card and charged $2 to be returned when theirs is located. I gave him a new key card to his room and asked if he was a student or a hotel guest. He replied, "Student." At this point, I should have checked our systems to charge his account, but I was caught up doing administrative duties and forgot. I used to trust people way too easily at this job, but quickly learned from it. Later on in the night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m., he came back to the desk again and said that he couldn't get into his room. I asked if he just forgot his key again, and he said no, the door wasn't working. I asked if the light was coming on when he swiped his card, and he said no, so I figured the batteries were dead. I told him I had to change the batteries and went up to his room with him. He asked me for my name and I told him. He didn't tell me his. I opened the room door manually with a master key and told him to prop it open while I worked on the back panel to replace the batteries. He said, "No, it's okay. I'll close it," and closed and deadbolted the door locked. Really fucking weird, but I tried not to think about it. I've changed the batteries for plenty of other doors by this point, and some of the students were iffy about having their doors propped open for their room to be displayed for everyone walking by. He also had a really thick accent, and I thought he might be an international student, since we had a lot of students from other countries where English was not their first language. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and maybe it was just a language barrier issue. At this point though, I really felt like something was wrong. but I tried to ignore it so I didn't freak him out. While I was trying to focus on fixing the door as quickly as possible, he kept trying to entice me to go further into the room, saying that his bed was broken and he needed me to take a look at it and that there was something underneath it that needed to be fixed, etc. He held out a little gold house key and said, "I have a key, go get it," and threw it under the bed. It said there was a leak under the fridge. Just kept trying to get me to go down on the ground, throwing random problems at me. Obviously, I told him no. I'd send maintenance up here in the morning to take a look at it and to check if anything was broken. I had my back to him and he asked me if I would take off my glasses. I said, "No, I need them to see." His tone of voice changed, and in the most steady, chilling manner, he said, "Ella, it's okay, you could take them off." And from behind me, he reached around and tried to take off my glasses. I swatted his hand away, trying to remain composed, and said, "No thanks, I need to keep them on." Even though he was creeping the fuck out of me, I didn't want to be rude to him. I didn't want to get in trouble if he complained about me, or risk upsetting him and having him yell at me. I got up to grab something from the door repair kit and undid the door deadbolt and opened it up in the process. He jumped towards the door and closed it again and told me to keep it closed. I told him no, I had to open it to start reprogramming it from the front. While I held the door open with my foot and grabbed something from the door repair kit, he started playing with the little wispy hairs at the top of my forehead and trying to touch my shoulder. I swatted him away again and asked him not to touch me, just focused on getting the fuck out of there. He once again tried to get me to follow him into the bedroom, saying that the bed was broken, and I went as far as the door frame to see if I could spot the actual problem with his bed. This is when I realized that he had nothing in his room. No dishes in his kitchen, no shower curtain in the bathroom, no bedsheets on the bed, nothing. This wasn't his room. My brain once again went back into the international student theory, thinking that he had just arrived today and hadn't gotten a chance to buy anything yet. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I fiddled around with the door for a few seconds before announcing that it was fixed and quickly gathering the door kit and left. Before I reached the elevator, he came out without his shoes on to follow me. He tried to get back in to get his shoes on and called out, "Ella, the door isn't fixed. You need to come back." I went back and opened the door manually and told him if the door was broken, I'd have to send up maintenance to fix it in the morning. I knew he was going to follow me to the elevator again, so I closed the door behind me once he went back inside and ran down the stairwell as fast as I could. When I got back to the front desk, I checked the computer and saw that the room that he was in was supposed to be empty. It wasn't a student room or a hotel room. I locked myself in the back office and called campus security. He came down a few minutes later and went behind the desk. I yelled at him to get on the other side and wait, now that I knew that he wasn't a resident. He tore a corner off a slip of paper I had sitting on my desk and drew a flower on it, and then put it on top of my papers. When security arrived, he ran back to the empty room and tried convincing them that he lived there, so he wouldn't have to leave. He kept showing them his key, which had decided to work on the door again somehow. They escorted him back downstairs and came to ask me if he really did live there. Obviously he fucking didn't. That's why I called you guys, crying and terrified. He kept interjecting and tried to argue that he did live there, but couldn't even recall his room number when asked. Security asked him for his student card, and he couldn't produce it, so they told him he would have to leave if he couldn't prove that he lived there. While they were grabbing his information, I listened from the office and could immediately tell that he was lying. The phone number he gave was just a bunch of random numbers. The name he gave them was prefixed by, as if he was trying to think of a name. When they asked him for his address, he just said, "Across the street." One security guard asked if he lived in the apartments across the street, and he said yes, but he couldn't tell them what building number it was. He said his apartment number was 1200, but I moved into that building a few months later, and apartment 1200 does not exist. When security asked him his purpose of sneaking into a room, he just kept up with the ums and us, and saying he didn't know. They asked, "Were you trying to see a friend? Do you know anyone who lives here? Were you here to hurt somebody?" He kept on fidgeting and saying, "I don't know. No reason. I was just here." At one point, he tried to tell them that he was my friend, At which point, I poked my head out of the office to say that I literally never seen him before this night. He left. We didn't call the police because he didn't actually do anything, but it was still fucking unsettling. Later on, it dawned on me how he figured that room was vacant. One of the housekeepers had been using it as her personal break room. A few days later, the housekeeper came to the desk and told me they had found the door deadbolt open, the TV was on, and the housekeeper was inside watching TV. She must have forgotten to close the door when she left that night, and that's when the creep let himself into the building and found it. I never saw him again, and to this day I have no clue what he was doing there. I haven't worked there since last winter, and overnight shifts still give me the heebie-jeebies. In the summer of 2015, I was 33 years old. I was broke, jobless, in Mexico City. My entire life had gone steadily down the drain for the past couple of years, and my best friend had moved back to Europe. I was tired and bored, so when an online friend I had met in person 2 years before invited me to spend a month in his farmhouse in Norway, I accepted without hesitation. The deal was simple. In exchange for some work at the farm, I would get a pretty sweet holiday in a country I always wanted to visit. I had no problem doing labor work, and in fact I was looking forward to do it and get my body back into some real action. Since I moved to Mexico City from Canada in 2011, I had been feeling rusty and soft. So I packed my suitcase, put on my boots, and said goodbye to Mexico City the best way I knew how, getting pissed drunk. I arrived at Stavanger in Norway, but my suitcase decided to go to Thailand instead. So after an hour of filling out reports and giving the address to my friend's house, I was able to walk out and meet him again. My friend Harold. He was standing there, confused and annoyed. He told me later that he was about to leave the airport, thinking I decided not to take the flight after all. I guess I was lucky. That night, I spent it with Harold and his friends in an oceanfront apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Stavanger, getting drunk on Norwegian beer and smoking hash. Disgusting shit if you ask me. I prefer the real thing. But anyways, I felt welcomed and content. The next day, Harold drove me all the way to his farmhouse, about an hour south of Stavanger, in a community called Egersund. At least I think that's the name of the place I was in. Norwegian names and addresses are weird if you're not too familiar with them. The land Harold owned was huge and beautiful. Not really sure how it all works, but in his property, there's a lighthouse that attracts a lot of tourists from all over Europe. The house itself was small, located on the top of a hill with a huge barn next to it. Harold lived alone in a 2-story house, but I was told the basement housed a tenant. As soon as I glanced to the basement window, I got a strange feeling of dread. There was a webcam facing the driveway, and the rest of the windows were covered with boxes and papers, but I decided not to mention it since Harold didn't seem to care. I just assumed the guy was an eccentric man, or maybe was just a normal precaution considering we were more or less in the middle of nowhere, with the neighboring houses separated by big fields. I took my mind off of it and focused on the joy of being in Norway. After being installed in one of the bedrooms upstairs, I was informed that week Harold's son's wedding was going to be celebrated, and thus, the house was going to be filled with the bride's family. In general, it was great to meet them, but on my second night, when everyone had gone to sleep and Harold and I were still chatting and drinking beer, I got to meet the tenant, Olaf. Harold had been having some troubles with his new smartphone, and apparently Olaf was tech-savvy, and indeed had been the one purchasing the phone for Harold. We went downstairs to Olaf's basement. Now, Harold kept telling me he didn't like Olaf, and was actually upset by the way Olaf kept the newly remodeled basement. But from what I understood, they kinda had a relationship more than just a landlord-tenant. The basement was dark, all the windows were covered, and piles of junk cluttered the entire place. The bedroom was full of computer parts and electronic junk he had blinking and beeping. Olaf invited us to sit down, and when he turned on his desk lamp to check Harold's phone, I got my first real look of him. He was in his mid-40s, but looked older, shaved head, really skinny, big nose, and deep shadows under his eyes. He had the entire look of a meth addict. I should know, since I worked in a recovery house in British Columbia, Canada. I had seen the same face back then in people who were dealing with some severe addictions. The way he stuttered only confirmed further my observations, and I decided I had to keep an eye on him. My gut told me right then and there that he was trouble. Olaf finished with Harold's phone and then directed his attention to me. He asked if I wanted to see some porn, to which I declined entirely. I just wanted to leave the dark, oppressive basement. Harold laughed a drunken laughter and asked Olaf if he had gay porn, to which Olaf said he didn't care about the sexualities of the videos. He simply liked to see people getting things introduced in them. When he said it, I got chills running down my spine and asked myself if he meant that in just a sexual way or if there was a more ominous meaning to it, but we didn't stay to find out. Harold had a busy day the next day, and I was tired and thoroughly creeped out by Olaf. When we were back in the house, I asked Harold if he trusted his friend, to which Harold answered that Olaf wasn't his friend. He was just an addict renting the basement. The government paid Harold the rent, and a nurse visited him twice a week to bring his medication. After dropping that bomb, he said goodnight and went to his bedroom. I tried not to think about Olaf, but between my gut feeling and him popping in the house unannounced when everyone else was out preparing for the wedding that weekend, I couldn't really relax. The first time he went inside was to give me a flash drive with movies he had illegally downloaded from the internet. He made sure to emphasize the illegal part. The second time he seemed high and wanted to simply let me know if I needed something, I could ask him for anything, but asked me not to tell Harold about him going upstairs. He said that and then walked out very slowly and carefully, as if he knew he would fall if he rushed. When the wedding was over and the house was empty again, except Harold and me, the encounters with Olaf became stranger and more often. One time I was in the kitchen fixing myself some breakfast. I turned around to find Olaf standing in the kitchen door, bleeding from his nose and staring at me. I jumped out of my skin and dropped my breakfast, making a huge mess. He didn't seem to notice, but simply started babbling incoherently while directing his cloudy eyes to the ceiling on top of my head. I was petrified, trying to think of a train of actions that wouldn't trigger a violent response from him, when he simply turned around and quietly walked out of the house. I started to lock the doors whenever I was alone in the house after that day. When I told Harold about this, he got visibly mad and went downstairs to talk and yell at Olaf. Harold told me that he didn't really like him to have the basement and that he tried to kick him out several times, but the government always ruled against evicting Olaf, and Harold's sister was mostly responsible for it. She felt bad for the guy and was 100% on Olaf's side, just because he had the same name as her father. Go figure. So Harold had to learn to live with him in the basement, but only because Olaf was supposed to be clean and in treatment for his addiction. After that day, Olaf stopped being friendly with me and became just a cold, invasive presence in my life. There was one day when I was in the barn chatting with a couple of Harold's friends when Olaf entered the barn to place his laptop and some homemade looking gadget by the window. Despite no one asking him, he began to explain to us that he was using it to hack into other people's networks and get their Wi-Fi passwords. You know, like everyone does, right? He gave me a nasty glare and then stormed out. I turned to Harold's friends and told him that I was completely afraid of him, and I had this feeling that he would attack me one day. Harold's friends told me that that would never happen, but if I ever felt like I was in real danger, I could give them a call and they would pick me up. We exchanged numbers, hugged and said our goodbyes for the night. The next days, things between Harold and I turned sour, mostly because I didn't feel safe anymore, and I had expressed my wish to instead go to Germany to visit a man who is now my husband. Apparently, Harold had hoped for us to grow closer, but had failed to let me know. In the end, I was exhausted and didn't want to deal with that anymore. I should mention that Harold has severe alcoholism that I wasn't aware of before until I spent a month seeing him get filthy wasted on a daily basis. To some, that might be attractive, but not to me. So altogether, the situation was bad, and I wanted out. I had done my job. I had done nothing wrong, and I wanted to be able to relax away from both of them. That night, I decided to organize my flight to Germany from Norway. Harold went out to get drunk and didn't come back until the morning the next day. I tried to stay up and wait for him to talk, but I must have fallen asleep at some point. I woke up to the sound of the front door being closed and caught a glance of him walking towards the barn with a dog and a 6-pack of beers through the living room window. I then tried to send him a message through Facebook, but discovered the internet was down. That's weird, I thought, and the whole time I had been there, the internet never failed, not even once. I went to the router and restarted it a couple times to no avail. I decided to let it be. Maybe Harold had cut the internet as a way of drunk childish punishment. So I would just have to get on with my morning routine and have breakfast before going to knock on the barn door. That would give him some time to blow off some steam, I thought. I went downstairs to the bathroom, got comfortably naked and jumped into the shower, ready to refresh myself, and sing a couple of songs to lift my spirits in preparation for all the grim talk that awaited me with Harold. Halfway through the first song, I hear a loud bang coming from the front door, followed by someone screaming my name. I thought Harold must be pissed drunk and angry. I sighed while turning off the shower, thinking I was going to have a long argument, when the bathroom door slammed open and I saw to my horror, Olaf coming in with a completely deranged expression on his face, wielding a big cutter knife. The kind employees used in warehouses to open boxes. For a few seconds I couldn't think or focus on anything other than a knife in his hands and the fact that I was naked, wet and cornered in a small bathroom in the middle of nowhere in Norway. I was paralyzed. My biggest fear was actually happening. I couldn't scream or move, just staring at the knife he kept pulling and pushing, making that now horrifying noise those blades do when operated. I was just about to pass out when Olaf's screams brought me back to the gravity of the situation. He was yelling, accusing me of playing with Harold's feelings. He was calling me a liar, a filthy Mexican, and throwing in some threats about cutting me open and fucking me up if I tried to take anything from Harold. That, I think, is what got my gears moving once again. He called me a thief. I can be called whatever, but I'm not a thief, and I'm not a liar. So I'm standing there getting myself angry at the psycho in front of me, threatening my life. My training from the recovery house in Canada kicked in. I remember the rules when dealing with alter addicts. Make eye contact. Keep your hands down so you don't startle them. Speak in a calm but dominant voice, and always refer to them by their name. And that's exactly what I did. Despite the fear and the certainty of me being stabbed to death, I stared at him in his cloudy, crazy wide open eyes and said, Olaf, you are a thief. You are the one that keeps stealing Harold's silverware. Olaf, you are the one that keeps breaking into his house. Olaf, Harold is not your friend. Olaf, Harold doesn't want you living here. It was a long shot, but it worked. My words made him confused, and I was able to take one single step forward, making him take one small step back. He then charged at me again with his rant and wielding his knife to my chest and neck. I could feel the cold sweat dripping down my back and a burning void forming in my stomach every time he launched at me with that knife, but I didn't flinch. I stood my ground and kept repeating the same words to him, every time gaining another step, pushing him little by little out of the bathroom. He might have noticed what I was doing, but by then it was too late. When he took that last step out of the bathroom door frame, I moved as fast as my terrorized body allowed me and slammed the door shut on his stupid crooked nose. I locked it immediately and pushed my body against it with all my body weight, while a storm of curses, punches, and kicks rained on that little farmhouse door. I remember praying to a god that I didn't really believe in to hold the door in its place and to keep the psycho outside. There was nothing I could use in that bathroom to defend myself. Nothing against an infuriated, high psychopath wielding a knife and a possibly broken nose. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard and felt a last strong kick to the door, and then, to my relief, he stormed out of the house with a loud bang of the front door, announcing his exit. However, I stayed put for another 20 minutes, not able to breathe or think of anything else than keeping the door closed. I wanted to puke, but I couldn't move. Eventually, my senses came back and I knew I had to act quickly. I opened the door of the bathroom, flew upstairs, got dressed, and then exited the house through the window to the garden. I knew he could hear me moving on the first floor, and that he had that stupid camera spying the driveway. I jumped to the garden, jumped up fence, and ran around the house to the barn. I kicked and banged, screaming for Harold to let me in, but it was useless. The drunk fuck was living his drama, and I needed help, so I ran all the way to the next house where the sister lived, rang the bell, and when she opened it, I explained to her the best way I could about what just happened. She didn't speak a word of English, so it was a comical exchange for about 10 minutes until her expression shifted from confusion to absolute terror, mirroring my own. She walked me to the barn, opened the door, commanded Harold to guard me, and went straight to the basement to confront Olaf. I was shocked and shaking, still trying to explain to Harold what just happened. His drunken state was gone by the time I had finished explaining. He too went to the basement, and I could just hear screams. They took Olaf out. The sister and her husband got Olaf into the car and took him away. Harold stayed with me all day. I drank so much beer, but I simply couldn't get drunk. I wanted to get drunk. I wanted to forget, but I simply couldn't. I was told that Olaf admitted having a knife and that his intentions were to make me fight him. So in reality, he wanted an excuse to stab the life out of my naked butt. After all, he liked to see people having things introduced in them, right? That night, I slept in the house while Harold kept guard of the house. I had some tools with me to defend myself, and of course, I slept fully dressed. It was a horrible night. The next morning, we went to the police to file a report, but even the cops seemed baffled and couldn't believe something like that could happen in their small, peaceful, picture-perfect community. But they believed me, and the cop who took my statement asked me if there was somewhere I could go while this was all sorted out. I told them in fact I was planning to visit Germany the very next day. The last day, I barely spoke with Harold. I didn't blame him, but he told me that in his drunken state, he had told Olaf that I was leaving and that he was sad about it. Since Olaf had been doing drugs all night, he understood it as he had to defend Harold. So he, Olaf, cut off the internet, waited for me to go in the shower, and went upstairs to do his job. I left Norway without a single word, without looking back. They told me I could testify via Skype whenever the trial started, so they took my information and promised me justice would be served. It's been more than a year now, and I've never heard back from the police. When I asked Harold about it, he told me the police dropped the case for lack of evidence, and Olaf is back in Harold's basement doing whatever it is he does. Life goes on. I was angry for a while, but even anger goes away after a while if there's nothing to burn. I tried to focus on the good things of life and life itself. Every day is now a gift or a chance, but the shadow of fear has never really left me. I keep looking over my shoulder, keep studying people just in case I have to defend myself. I still have a sense of dread whenever I take a shower, especially at a gym where I'm more vulnerable. I can't help thinking that anyone else would have ended up a bloody corpse in a pool of blood in that shower, unnoticed for hours until someone had to use that bathroom. If I had done something different, if Olaf hadn't been so high to be intimidated by my words, that bloated corpse would have been me. I still don't know how to get rid of that thought, but I try. All I know is Olaf is free, and I really don't want to ever meet him again.